Tom Burnett Senior, father of Flight 93 hero Tom Burnett Jr., recently traveled to Pennsylvania to protest the Crescent Memorial to Flight 93 and to ask all Americans to please help stop the Park Service from planting a giant Islamic-shaped crescent atop his son's grave.
I'm asking all Americans, and I'm looking at these cameras now, I'm speaking to every American that we must stop this terrible mistake. We must stop this terrible mistake. We must stop it. I was on the jury. It was blatantly obvious that this was a Islamist memorial. Red, the trees, the Crescent of Embrace, mind you, and it was terrible. And I made a point at that meeting to tell people that we have an Islamist design here that can't go forward. Please, stay with me.
Alec Rawls, that's me, also attended the Memorial Project meeting.
The original Paul Murdoch architect's publicity photo showed what appeared to be a bare-naked Islamic crescent and star flag planted on the crash site.
The left side of this graphic is a 2005 publicity shot of the winning Crescent of Embrace design. On the right is Wikipedia's typical Islamic crescent and star, colored red and viewed from the same angle. The copse of trees that sits roughly in the position of the Islamic star is the Sacred Ground Plaza. It sits just above the impact point of Flight 93.
Now, it was discovered very quickly, within a couple of days. Bloggers discovered that a person who was sitting between the tips of the giant crescent and facing into the center of the crescent would be facing almost exactly at Mecca.
Yep, and it's very easy to verify. To determine the orientation of the crescent, imagine a person standing between the most protruding tips of the crescent structure and facing into the center of the crescent. That's the red arrow in this graphic. To see that the crescent points to Mecca, just use the Mecca-direction calculator at Islam.com to generate a graphic of the Qibla direction, the Muslim prayer direction, from Somerset, Pennsylvania, 10 miles from the crash site. That's the green circle in this image. Notice that the red arrow points almost exactly in the Qibla direction, the direction to Mecca. To be precise, it points 1.8 degrees north of Mecca, plus or minus a tenth of a degree.
A crescent that Muslims face into to face Mecca is called a mihrab, and it's the central feature on which every mosque is built. Going to any mosque in the world, you'll see at the front a Mecca-direction indicator. The classic one is crescent-shaped. Bill, hold up that crescent again. That's a classic shape of an Islamic mihrab that's the central feature of a mosque. This is the world's largest mosque by a factor of 100.
Here are the two most famous mihrabs in the world. This is the mihrab of the Great Mosque in Cordoba, Spain. This one is the prototypical mihrab, the mihrab of the Prophet at the Prophet's Mosque in Medina. Both are crescent-shaped, face into the crescent to face Mecca.
I was on that second jury. I saw the red crescent of embrace. Obvious and blatant Islamic symbolism. Blatant. And I voiced my concern. And since that time, I've continued to voice my concern because it does not properly honor our people. We want to honor them properly because it'll reverberate in history and posterity will demand it. I'd like to get together and ask for an investigation, unbiased, transparent, honest. We gotta be honest about this thing.
The overt Islamic symbolism of the crescent design caused a national uproar when it was first unveiled in September 2005. Reluctantly, the Park Service promised that it would get rid of the Islamic symbol shapes, but it never did. It only disguised them. Paul Murdoch described his original crescent design as a broken circle. The design is called the Circle of Embrace now, and the graphics were recolored, but the Park Service's own website acknowledges that the circle is still broken. The only actual change was to include an extra arc of trees, planted to the rear of a person facing into the giant central crescent, that explicitly represents a broken off part of the circle. Here is an animated graphic showing the Crescent of Embrace design with the Circle of Embrace redesign gradually superimposed on top. The parts that were only recolored are then removed, leaving only the one physical change, the extra arc of trees seen flashing outside of the mouth of the original crescent. Notice that every particle of the original crescent design remains completely intact. The Crescent of Embrace is still there. Even the architect's terrorist memorializing description of the design is unaffected by the extra arc of trees. Paul Murdoch's explanation has always been that the flight path breaks the circle. The symbolic circle of peace was broken on 9/11, turning it into a giant Islamic-shaped crescent. That sounds like a tribute to the terrorists, and indeed, this is the only logical interpretation. We all know that it was the terrorists who broke the circle of peace on 9/11. Thus, the circle-breaking, crescent-creating feat that is depicted in Murdoch's design can only be attributed to the terrorists. A clearer depiction of Al-Qaeda victory is hard to imagine. As the Park Service website admits, the flight path still breaks the circle, only now a broken-off chunk of the circle remains floating out beyond the mouth of the crescent. The unbroken part of the circle, what is symbolically left standing in the aftermath of 9/11, is still a giant Islamic crescent still pointing to Mecca. Project spokesman accused Tom Burnett of trying to get an improper do-over after he failed to convince the jury. But it is the memorial project that is trying to get the most improper do-over ever. Gate security, the American people, stopped Paul Murdoch from sneaking his Islamist memorial onto the crash site. Instead of carting him away, the memorial project told him to go back outside, add a bit of disguise, and see if he could get his giant Islamic crescent through on the second try, which is exactly what happened. This was after the memorial project promised to eliminate the Islamic symbol shapes. Not only is the giant central crescent still there, but it is not the only Islamic-shaped crescent that remains completely intact in the so-called redesign.
The Tower of Voices that looks like a minaret and has a crescent at the top. You can look up there and see it, you know.
That's a typical Islamic crescent. Covers about 2/3 of a circle of arc. That's just like the giant central crescent. And literally dangling down below it, this symbolic Islamic heavens are the symbolic lives of the 40 heroes. That's an Islamic crescent soaring in the sky above the symbolic lives of these 40 heroes. You people here are choosing not to see this, but it's there. You can all see it. This is your graphic. And that's what everybody who comes to this memorial is going to see. An Islamic crescent in the sky, soaring in the sky above the symbolic lives of these 40 heroes. Well, in Islam, there's only heaven and hell. So you figure out what that means.